this idea that Israel funded Hamas and put Hamas in there or like helped it, like that's not necessarily true. The origin of Hamas was that they were a charity in Gaza, a spin-off of the Muslim Brotherhood in 1973. And in that period, they were completely nonviolent. They were very anti-violent. And in that period, that was the one period where it was an Israeli brigadier who was the governor of Gaza who had a budget for charities, and he recognized Islamic Center as a charity and then gave them a small budget, like it was just some money. That pretty much ended when Hamas, when the guy was found stockpiling weapons in one of the mosques. And then he was arrested. He was released very quickly after as part of a prisoner exchange, because that's how they usually do it. And then they became Hamas in 87. But since they've become Hamas, I think the mistake people say that Israel made was that they ignored the Hamas threat because they were focused on the PLO. That's definitely a legitimate criticism. It's also, but as far as them supporting, the only time Israel ever supported Hamas was when they were a non-violent charity. And it's like, that kind of makes sense because the people who were doing lots of violence against civilians at the time was the PLO, right? So it would always make sense that you want your opponents to be non-violent and charitable, right? So
unless you're Netanyahu,
it's a whole misconception. Yeah.
In which case, the situation reverses, and it's pretty optically beneficial for Hamas to be the unreasonable jihadist lead of the Palestinian people.
No? And there's that quote from Netanyahu where he says that if you oppose the Palestinian state, you should be okay with Hamas, or you should help Hamas. But even with Netanyahu, the one bit of evidence we have of his involvement with Hamas money is that he, in between 2013 and 18, might be slightly off for those years, was he didn't give Hamas money. He allowed Qatari money to go through into Gaza because I think it was the PA in the West Bank had held back on funds that were going into Gaza. And Netanyahu's reasoning for doing that wasn't just the whole divide and conquer thing. It was also because that was funding that was plugging a gap for humanitarian aid. So I think the other part of that Netanyahu quote is saying it was actually okay. It was better that we were observing it because we knew it was going to humanitarian causes. It turned out now that intelligence officials believe that some of it was getting funneled into weapon manufacturing, but that's not
unsurprising.
That's not giving money. That's just like, and I don't really like that talking point though, because it's like, it's a right-wing point, right? It's right-wingers who got angry that Netanyahu was allowing humanitarian aid to go into Gaza, because the right-wingers are like, well, if you give Hamas some fuel for their heating bills, they'll use them for rockets, right?
Right. Yeah. So, If you give them the water pipes, they'll cut them up and they'll use them for their bottle rockets and such. Okay. No, I appreciate the clarification. Since we're on the topic, could you clarify, or I guess since you know more than me in the subject, the other big thing that I remember with regards to the claim that Netanyahu wanted or brought about Hamas in some respect was that there has been very aggressive labeling of non-military organizations in the Gaza Strip as being terrorist organizations, when even the UN has said, like, hey, why? I forget the exact names of the orgs, but it's been like a consistent process of like, it seems like Netanyahu's regime doesn't want there to be a civil society or an authority in the Gaza Strip outside of Hamas, presumably because humanitarian orgs sort of like complicate the narrative and also give them the ability to kind of invite international attention. I would need to go look up the names of those orgs. Do you know what I'm referring to?
Is this like the whole charity? It's like similar to this charity scandal, isn't it? It's like, oh no, these guys Is that what you mean? Like the certain charitable orgs and different donors will go to Hamas money? Is that what you mean? Or?
I think it was as recent as like 2020, where the UN was even asking like, hey, why were these labeled as terrorist organizations? And my impression from that was that Netanyahu's administration kind of wants Hamas to be the only game in town in the Gaza Strip, because that makes the narrative really clean for him. You know, there's not like a bunch of different groups operating in the Strip. There's just the evil jihadists, which, I mean, Hamas are. So yeah, I would need to look up specifically what the names of the organizations are. I was just wondering if you knew anything about that. I think it's pretty uncontroversial to say that Netanyahu has politically benefited enormously from the instability and threat posed by Hamas in the Gaza Strip, because that's just classic strongman shit. Strongmen need a threat to, like, you know, point at and go, this is what I can protect you from. The question then is, like, to what extent has he sort of deliberately cultivated that environment? I do appreciate you clarifying the funding thing. I guess now it would be a matter of like softer assistance, like kind of clearing the path a bit.
Yeah, and I think another one of his failures was that he, as part of that humanitarian aid going to Qatar, because they knew that Israel was allowing it to go through, I think that was around the same time was that there were border protests at the Gaza wall, and they stopped around the time when that funding went through. So it's very possible that Netanyahu was sitting there thinking that he had actually bought some quiet from Hamas, because Hamas organized the protests.
I found it. Sorry. It was from 2021. It was UN human rights experts strongly and unequivocally condemn the decision by the Israel Minister of Defense, Benny Gantz, to designate 6 Palestinian human rights and civil society orgs as terrorist organizations. I'm sure the details on these specifically are pretty like nuanced, That's just the impression that I got from this, I guess. The idea of trying to cultivate kind of like an environment where Hamas is the only like voice that really comes out of the Gaza Strip. I didn't know if that was like misinfo on my part, but I stand by the mistake I made with the funding.
Yeah, I haven't looked into what you're talking about specifically, so I'd have to look.
No, I was just curious. Yeah. It was tangential. Yeah. Wait, sorry. By stand by my mistake, what I mean is I acknowledge it. Not that I'm right. Yeah.
I will keep making mistakes.
Thank you. I will keep making mistakes. I will keep concluding. Thank you.
Yeah.
And no, seriously, I appreciate it. I wanted to ask you though, because I've made a lot of declarative statements in terms of like what can be done moving forward. If you were, I don't know, if you could psychically take control of Netanyahu or whatever, I don't know. What direction would you want to go?
Right now, I could have answered this so much easier before October 7th. So maybe I'll just say what I would say then. Is like, I feel like if you're Netanyahu, you have to go, right? And you have to get a government in there that is actually serious about peace talks, because Netanyahu's not. Yeah, I think it's just to put something on the table that's like, okay, here's what we're going to do with regards to the borders, land swaps. Here's what we're going to do with regards to refugees. Here's what we're going to do with Jerusalem, and it's like just have that on the table so that at least a Palestinian leader can be like, well, I'm going to speak to Israel about this, right? So I guess things would be like a settlement freeze would be a start. Then it would be things like trying to negotiate with a Palestinian leader to do something like dismantling outposts. Do you know what outposts are?
In the West Bank?
Yeah.
I assume you mean like the little civilian pockets that they construct, and then they do the like, well, we need the IDF to defend these pockets, so we need a little bit more area around them. That thing?
Yeah, kind of. Yeah, they're settlements that aren't even considered legal by Israel. It's just people going in on their own accord, setting up usually what are like tents or modular homes or caravans. And those are the craziest religious nutcases who are usually the ones who are responsible for all the violence and throwing rocks at Palestinians and blocking their roads and cutting off their war. Yeah, those guys.
The Ben Gvir Hoover
Ben Gvir militant. Yeah. Ben Gvir's little fucking troop.
Yeah. Did you read that the interview? I forget which publication it was put in, but it was the one with one of those famous Israeli settlers. She's been arrested a few times, and it was basically just her doing like Deus Vult shit over Palestinians the whole interview. But it was like crazy how upfront she was about it.
Wait, sorry, say that again.
She was like talking about how like I don't care about Palestinian children dying. I have my own children to care about. She's been one of the more like active settlers. I forget her name, but there was like an article that came out a little while ago that I read on stream, and it was pretty wacky. So it was a little wacky.
Like settlers in general are a little bit more weird, but yeah, those ones in particular are just absolutely fucking insane.
She was like crazy for them. I think she was really out there.
And as far as Israel goes, it's like that's you enforcing your own laws, right? Because Israel doesn't consider those outposts legal. Like they should just occasionally they get rid of them, and occasionally they get rid of them, and they give little pictures to the UN, say, look, we're doing a good job. But a lot of them, most of them stay. So that's like a big thing. Definitely, like, I don't know, start convicting settlers of crimes like properly, not just like 1 year if they shoot like 2 people, like, because that happens a lot. Yeah. They're very, very soft on crime, unfortunately, and I'm personally hard on crime. So fuck it, yeah. Like, as for right of
Law
return,
and Order live stream here.
Yeah, as for right of return, I think Israel should just recognize it. Like, just say, yeah, 948 ethnic cleansing, we did that. Sorry, and then and that just opens the door to some negotiation that can be amicable to both sides. I think them recognizing it is just like, that's just the point of history, right? It's not like a political negotiation, right? It's just like the government narrative on it is just very much, yeah, this was actually fine because the Arabs were going to genocide us, right? So it's like,
at least
they need to change that. Like, just catch up with your own historians, you know? Like,
acknowledge like I guess like a shared language for future peace, you know, so we can at least agree on what even happened. I think, yeah, the shit with the outpost reminds me a lot of like reading about sundown towns or like clan towns in the American South for a while, where like everyone knew what was going on. You would ask the local sheriff and he'd be like, well, I ain't heard nothing of that, wink, you know, but like, you know, obviously it's like they know and they kind of agree with what's being done. I don't think everyone in the Israeli government agrees with the situation in the West Bank, of course. I just think that with Netanyahu being in power and Ben-Gvir being in power, the non-hardliners have either been ousted or aren't even in a position where any of their advocacy would do very much. Certainly not after October 7th, right? Like, holy shit.